I'd love to see Clio be pervasive in the same way Bill Gates had the vision and the dream of a PC being on every desk and in every home. I have the dream that Clio will be instrumental to running every law office, both big and small.
This is Bob Ambrogi, and I am here at the Clio Cloud Conference, recording live. Does that make sense?
Recording live.
Recording live.
Yep.
And here with the co-founder and CEO of Clio, Jack Newton. How are you, Jack?
I'm great, Bob. Happy to be here.
So you and I just recorded a podcast all of maybe 6 weeks ago or so.
That's right.
And at that time, we joked, we've done this a few times already, and we have talked a number of times over the years. But this feels like a particularly momentous occasion. I mean, you've had a major investment. This is the largest by far Clio Cloud conference ever.
Yep.
At the risk of recapping a few things we may have talked about before, let's start with that investment and just
Sure.
For the benefit of listeners who haven't kept up with the news, tell us what happened there.
So we announced our Series D investment round back at the beginning of September, which was a $250 million investment round led by TCV and JMI Equity. And that investment was the largest growth equity investment in legal history, and in fact, the largest growth equity investment of any kind ever in Canada. So, for our, we're a Canadian-based company. It was truly historic at a national level within Canada, and I think closer to home here in legal tech land. Really momentous investment, just really, I think, validating legal tech as an investment space, and I think a huge validation of our mission that we're pursuing at Clio. And I outlined some broad strokes of, what that mission and what that vision looks like in the keynote today, but I think to have the kind of world-class investors that we have in TCV and JMI underwrite that vision with a $250 million investment is pretty incredible and hugely validating for us.
Yeah, and one of the points you made in your keynote this morning, not specific to Clio, but is that you think that this is going to actually spur further growth and further investment in legal technology.
100%, and we've already seen it. I've talked to a handful of legal tech founders running earlier stage companies than Clio saying their phones started ringing pretty aggressively after we announced that round, that they've seen a bit of a sea change in terms of the tenor of the conversations they're having with investors. And I think a large investment like this really helped put legal tech on a map. And I think what most people don't understand about venture capitalists and other types of investors is they really are herd animals. They chase after certain hypotheses, they chase after certain spaces, but they really also have this immense sense of FOMO where they don't want smarter money than theirs going and investing in a space like legal tech without a horse in the race. So what I've seen early signs of, and I'm sure we'll see the ripple effect of this investment round over the next 2 to 3 years, is I expect investment in legal tech to really accelerate as investors kind of perk up and start to understand what the bigger opportunity in legal looks like. And the opportunity for innovation. And there's just not many industries like legal around where there's, I believe, truly a greenfield opportunity in a market that has not meaningfully adopted technology in the way that it can and maybe the way it should.
Yeah. Well, not to put you on the spot, but one of the rumors I keep hearing is that some of the investors who are calling those little startups are calling on behalf of Clio.
Right. Well,
are you doing some shopping right now?
Yeah. Look, I certainly won't play coy around that. Part of our growth strategy, and I think you saw a first sign of it last year when we purchased Lexicata.
Yeah.
For those of you that may not
announced at this conference last year. Right?
That's right. And for those of your listenership that may not be familiar with Lexicata, they were one of our most popular integration partners. They built a really great technology for client intake and for legal CRM. And we saw just a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of opportunity to combine Lexicata, and Clio, and launch Clio Grow at the Clio Cloud Conference next year, with an ecosystem of 200 integration partners built on top of the Clio platform. Part of our growth strategy is certainly to essentially innovate, and there's two main ways we think we can innovate. We can innovate by developing our own products, and we have certainly a large and capable and excellent product development team right at Clio of over 100 people strong that can ship unbelievable value very quickly. But we will also look at strategic acquisitions to help accelerate our product roadmap in certain areas where we can increase the breadth and the depth of the product offerings and the solutions we're offering to our clients. We're keeping a very close ear to the ground in terms of what legal tech startups are doing interesting things. And I think if I was a legal tech founder, I think the other exciting exit path I have for my business is no longer maybe the moonshot of an IPO or the thought of getting bought by one of the big strategics like Thomson Reuters or LexisNexis, which certainly I know as an early stage founder, that wasn't necessarily the exit I was rowing for.
Right.
I think for many of them, they can now look at Clio as a potential exit, quote unquote exit, a potential partner though that can help them have impact and help them increase their reach in an accelerated fashion, and we can obviously sponsor continued product development within those companies. And I think it's ultimately a really good thing for legal innovation to have this kind of capital infusion that can be put to work in so many different ways.
Yeah, and in your keynote today, you talked about kind of the two pillars of what you want to do, what you plan to do with that investment, and how to build on that investment. And one of them really fits with what you were just talking about in terms of the partners, which is that you want Clio to become, as you put it, the operating system for law. What does that mean? Explain what you want to do.
Yeah, really, I think it's about Clio becoming the de facto technology used by lawyers and the system of record for the legal profession. Legal, I still believe, even with the success Clio's seen, legal still on a large scale remains fundamentally untransformed by technology. And you look at almost every other major industry, whether it's agriculture or medicine or finance, and it has been revolutionized from the ground up by technology over the last 20 years. And legal, you walk into most law offices and they're not run in 2019 all that differently than they might have been in 1989.
Right.
And I think that's just an unbelievable opportunity for all of us on the legal innovation side of the fence to realize that there's this untapped market opportunity. And one big pillar that I believe legal needs to truly see that innovation be realized is to have an operating system, a technological foundation upon which more innovation can be built.
Right.
And that's the vision we have for Clio. When I say let's be the operating system for legal, I mean a few things. Number one, I'd love to see Clio be pervasive in the same way Bill Gates had the vision and the dream of a PC being on every desk and in every home. I have the dream that Clio will be instrumental to running every law office, both big and small. And I furthermore want Clio to be the technology that better helps connect clients with lawyers and lets lawyers better deliver services to clients. And a big part, I think, of lawyers realizing the opportunity that they have ahead of them is in adopting technology and becoming more productive and becoming more efficient. Yeah. And Clio, I believe, by offering the foundation for what a law firm needs from a technological perspective, and then allowing this ecosystem of over 200 integration partners to almost allow lawyers to custom tailor Clio to their specific practice needs. Yeah. We offer the same kind of power that Microsoft Windows did in the 1990s, the same kind of power that iOS or Android offers to consumers in the mobile handset market. I think we can offer to the legal space. So that's definitely part one of the master plan for Clio.
And does that span firms of all sizes? I mean, I think you kind of started out as a product primarily for smaller firms, and I know you've moved up market as you've grown and as you've developed. But how far up market do you go? And realistically, In your mind, what's the timeline for that? How do you? At what point do you really start to achieve that vision of becoming almost pervasive in law?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer the first question, we've really let the market pull us up market rather than pushing our way there. And what we've seen is a few things at a structural level. We've seen larger firms get comfortable with cloud computing. In the early days of Clio, one of the reasons we focused on solos was their hair was on fire. They felt the pain of not having technology acutely, and they didn't have the IT guy or the floor of IT guys that some larger law firms have to help support their law practices.
Yeah.
So we started in the solo small firm space, and as the product's capabilities have gotten more sophisticated and more robust, and as simultaneously we've seen willingness to adopt cloud solutions increase in the large firm space, we've seen larger and larger and larger firms adopt Clio to a point where now we feel comfortable talking to a firm of 100 lawyers as a potential Clio customer. And we have some very large firms of over 1,000 lawyers that have adopted Clio for some of their practice groups.
Yeah.
That might number in the hundreds of lawyers as well.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think the large firm use case is an interesting one, but something I've always been laser focused on is the fact that I think the law firm of the future in many ways is the solo small firm market. 80% of lawyers practice in firms of less than 10 lawyers. That's the most rapidly growing subsegment of the market.
Yeah.
Almost 50% of lawyers practice as solos. So when we look at the market demographics and when we think about who are the change agents of the legal space, who does Clio want to be locking arms with over the next decade to go and revolutionize legal and transform the industry, it's going to be the solos and small firms and boutique firms that I think number in the handful of lawyers, or maybe a dozen, 20 lawyers at the high end that are going to be some of our best partners, because they're going to be the most agile, the most innovative law firms. And that's the segment of the market I would still regard as our sweet spot.
Yeah.
But then we look at some of the biggest firms in the country starting to look at Clio as a way of almost getting a competitive edge. How do I drive some innovation into my law firm? How do I get my lawyers thinking about the client experience? How do I get my lawyers, how do I almost grant them superpowers with mobile access and client portals and some capabilities that even their $1 million on-prem systems don't offer them. We've seen large law firms look at Clio almost as a competitive advantage or an innovative advantage relative to their existing on-prem vendors.
Yeah. So one pillar of your future development is this operating system for legal vision. The other that you outlined this morning is your goal of helping to increase access to justice.
Right.
How can Clio help enhance access to justice?
So I think what I outlined in my keynote is really the frame I use to think about access to justice is really a product market fit problem. And as an entrepreneur myself, and as I tried to convey to the audience, everyone in the audience, the legal professionals in the audience should feel as entrepreneurial as well, because what they're facing is a huge market opportunity where the current legal services market is worth about $437 billion a year in the US alone. And yet the World Justice Project tells us that 77% of consumers' legal needs go unmet by lawyers. So on the demand side, we've got this enormous amount of demand for legal services. On the supply side, the lawyers themselves offering legal services, we paradoxically almost have lawyers telling us that 81% of lawyers are looking for more clients. So if you were any kind of entrepreneur, you'd look at this supply and demand side equation and just fundamentally be confused by the fact that there's so many people looking for legal services that don't seem to be able to connect with them. And on the supply side, you have so many lawyers willing to offer legal services but can't find enough clients. How do we bridge this gap? How do we better connect people that have legal problems with people that can solve legal problems? And when we think about the big picture for Clio, we think about the blue sky opportunity for Clio, but also the blue sky opportunity that exists for legal innovators. If we can tap into that 77% of the market that is not using lawyers to solve their legal problems, we can unlock a $1.4 trillion plus market. And and increase access to justice, have more people accessing legal services. And one of the points I made in my keynote is I think lawyers often talk about access to justice like it's this extrinsic factor, this external thing that they can't control, and that they need somebody else to solve this access to justice problem for them. And just look at the number of work for special committees and workshops and so on focused on access to justice. And yes, there are some structural places for the underprivileged and so on that we need to design special solutions for access to justice, but I think it's actually taking a very narrow lens on what access to justice looks like. I think when we're truly looking at the access to justice problem from a business perspective, it's as simple as saying the legal market could be a multiple of its current size if lawyers could figure out a way of designing their product, which is legal services and solving legal problems, and delivering those to consumers in a way that better meets their needs and better meets their expectations. And as simple as that sounds, it's I think a very clarifying lens for lawyers to look at the access to justice problem, not as a problem, but as a massive opportunity. And the other data point I outlined in the report is sometimes access to justice literally means having a hard time getting a lawyer to respond to an email or answer a phone call. And there's so much work to be done on that front. And I don't think lawyers realize maybe just how much low-hanging fruit there is when it comes to solving this access to justice problem.
Yeah, you literally said this morning, your quote was something like, you can help enhance access to justice simply by picking up your phone and answering your client's call when somebody calls you.
That's right. As mundane as that sounds, it's 100% true.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. I mean, of course, the access to justice problem is much greater than simple. I mean, there are, as you say, cost issues, there are structural issues, there are big problems with people not even knowing they have a legal problem to begin with.
That's right. It's a multifaceted problem, but I think we've, as an industry, as a profession, looked at this as a boil the ocean kind of problem.
Right.
And I think there's some very incremental, very straightforward changes that we can make in terms of how we're running our law offices and how we're servicing client needs that can, in the very, very short term, dramatically increase access to justice.
Yeah.
I think there's some relatively straightforward medium-term changes that we'll see, that technology can be a huge enabler in terms of helping lawyers deliver their legal services for a more efficient rate, lowering prices, increasing access to their legal services, maybe delivering their legal services on a flat fee basis or even a subscription basis. There's so many ways we can innovate on this business model. And technology is going to be a really key enabling part of this. One of the things I see on the technology side, by the way, I was chatting with a friend of mine that practices at a larger firm in Canada, and his comment to me was his firm's overhead costs for him were $20,000 a month. So he needs to do $20,000 of billing just to cover the overhead in terms of the AAA downtown office space that he's occupying, the support staff he has, the computer he has, the on-premise software they're paying for. So you think about that, and there's these structural inefficiencies in the legal space where the access to justice problem is the fact that he needs to charge $450 an hour just to help recover that $20,000 of overhead. And I think there's a not distant future where there's more lawyers practicing in WeWorks or practicing out of home offices or practicing out of their clients' locations where they can better deliver legal services, maybe deliver legal services over secure video chat, for example, and dramatically lower the cost to access their services. But I think crucially what a lot of lawyers, I think, get wrong in this is thinking that this translates to them making less money and being less successful than they are today. And I think it's the opposite. I think if you can eliminate, thanks to technology, these structural inefficiencies and this overhead that exists for most lawyers, you could have a lawyer increasing access to justice, charging their clients less, but making more money themselves in the future than they are today. And I think that's just it's a gigantic opportunity where we can increase access to justice, we can make individual lawyers more successful, and we can take out structural inefficiency in the existing legal services model.
Yeah. I met a woman here last night who's speaking, I think today, who is running a multi-state law practice while she lives in an RV with her family and travels around the country.
Yes, I met her as well. I thought that was just an amazing story.
And a happy Clio customer at that. On top of it, to put in a plug there for
legal services in WeWork's home offices and RVs.
Yeah. I know we're a little bit short on time, and I wanted to hit a couple of other areas. One is, I guess this is like maybe a really good point to. Okay. Number one is you just released a book. You announced this morning you're releasing a book, which encompasses, and I was able to see an advanced copy of it. So I've actually read the book, and it did a really good job with it, Jack. I will tell you that. But you really lay this all out in your book.
Right.
I mean, you lay out really your philosophy, what you've learned as a CEO, but also what you've observed as a CEO of a legal practice management company. So that is, I forget, blanking on the name of the book. I have it here in front. What's the name? The Client-Centered Law Firm.
The Client-Centered Law Firm.
Now,
that's right.
And people can order that. Do you want to say anything more about the book, or
no? I think that further to our conversation, the book is just a good encapsulation of my learnings over the last 10 years, and I've really been. It was funny. I was chatting with Matt Holman the other day, and I hadn't connected with him actually in a couple of years, and he was at the very first ClioCon. And Matt and I actually met at the very first tech show that Clio exhibited at, where I think you and I met in person for the first time as well, back in 2008. And Matt sent me a link to a video I did back in 2009, I think it was, at one of his Lex Think events, talking about the consumer experience and the client experience and how lawyers can start thinking about themselves in a more client-centric way. And I think what was amazing was Matt had also read an early advanced copy of the book, and his comment was, "Jack, you've been talking about this stuff for 10 years. This is the same story you've been talking about for a decade." And I really wanted to, in one more way, in addition to ClioCon and all the speaking I've done across the country over the last 10 years, distill my thoughts on the opportunity that lawyers have ahead of them. In a book, and a book that really frames this client-centric approach that I've used to develop Clio. I've very much developed Clio over the last decade with a client-centric viewpoint and with a view to how do I help make my customer successful. I think lawyers, with that simple pivot from what in many law firms is by default a lawyer-centric or a law firm-centric mode of decision-making into a client-centric mode of decision-making, can unlock an enormous amount of opportunity. So the book is coming out in January of 2020 in just a few short months. But you can purchase early copies of it on Amazon and almost every other bookseller starting today.
Is there another bookseller? I didn't.
Exactly. That's how good they've done the client experience.
Your people are giving us signals that we're running low on time here, but I wanted to just quickly hit on the Legal Trends Report, because what's really interesting about the Legal Trends Report now is that you've been doing this for 5 years? 4 years? What has it been?
4 years.
4 years. I mean, this is really the first time the legal profession has had actual data on what happens in law firms. And then this year, you could explain it, but I mean, this year you sort of supplemented some of what you're finding in that report with doing some of your own independent research and found some really surprising stuff. Can you recap quickly what that was?
Yeah, I think surprising is an understatement maybe. I think there's two really new innovative parts of the Legal Trends Report this year. One is what I describe as our good to great analysis. And we did a longitudinal study of what great law firm performance looks like. And we looked at an anonymized and aggregated data set of Clio customer data and tried to look at what are the patterns that help separate growing law firms, which are law firms that grew at a rate of more than 20% a year over this 5-year time frame, against the shrinking law firms that decreased their revenue growth by a factor of more than 20% over that 5-year time frame. And what we were trying to do is basically look for the set of metrics, the set of KPIs or key performance indicators that would help predict which law firms became the successful, thriving, and growing law firms, and which law firms saw stagnant growth or even started to shrink significantly. And the full answer is in the Legal Trends Report, which your listeners can download for free from Clio's website at clio.com. But the headline is that utilization rate, which is the number of billable hours you work per day out of the number of hours you have that are workable per day, is really the key to unlocking firm growth. And the firms that helped outpace in the growing category versus the shrinking category found a way of increasing their utilization rate by 1% to 2% over a 5-year time frame. So that was one, that good to great analysis is a really, really interesting, and like you said, a first ever for the industry to have this scale
to have a data
of data and the sophistication of data analysis to look at a 5-year journey for a law firm where we can start to talk about what is predictive of a successful law firm. Now, the second major component of the Legal Trends Report this year was the consumer study, where we tried to better understand how consumers buy legal services. And the super interesting part of this year's study was looking at how responsive law firms are in responding to inbound client inquiries. And we saw a data point that told us 67% of clients said that when they were shopping for a lawyer, at least one of the lawyers they contacted didn't get back to them. And we thought that's impossible. Is that really true? So we actually commissioned a third party to essentially secret shop 1,000 law firms so we could get baseline data for the industry to understand how well they're doing from a responsiveness perspective. And it's pretty abysmal. I mean, at a very high level, we saw more than half of law firms did not respond.
So you had people directly email and telephone law firms.
We had people
you hired, you paid to do this.
A massive team. This was a large-scale study. Phone law firms and email law firms and evaluate how well those law firms responded. And the spoiler is lawyers, on average, did very poorly at being responsive to these inbound inquiries. And I think what it highlights, and obviously what we're trying to do here is not to embarrass the profession or make lawyers feel bad about themselves, but to highlight some of the structural elements that are setting lawyers up for failure when it comes to responsiveness. When they're in court, when they're in a client meeting, when they're attending CLE, when they're at a conference like this, they're just not able to respond effectively to inbound phone calls and inbound emails. And I think what this study really highlights is the urgent need for lawyers to adopt better processes, better technology to be responsive to those inbound inquiries. You know, on the phone side, we have just on the exhibit floor here at ClioCon alone, at least 3 call answering services like Ruby Receptionist that integrate with Clio, can make sure that every single inbound lead is converted into a potential opportunity and tracked appropriately. On the email front, one of the features we announced is an automated scheduling tool that lets you very easily and effortlessly schedule appointments with clients. There's likewise, outside of Clio, plenty of marketing automation software that lets lawyers build automated responses to emails so they can look they can look responsive without actually physically responding to responses themselves. So I view this as a huge call to action for the industry, where, again, we talk about this access to justice problem, and we talk about the fact that 81% of lawyers want more clients. It literally, increasing access to justice and getting more clients involves literally just picking up the phone or answering email, or more importantly, setting up proxies, solutions, technology, systems that can help you be responsive without necessarily being responsive yourself.
Well, I'm going to refer my listeners back also to our earlier podcast I posted on September 5th, because we talk in there a little bit more about some of the future plans for the company and what you're working on. And I know our time is short today, but thank you very much for taking the time out of a very busy day to
an important tradition of any legal conferences chatting with you.
Yeah,
so
I think we do talk at just about every one of these, don't we? But
thank you.
Yeah, well, good to see you. Congratulations on a great conference again this year.
Thank you.